Good afternoon. Today we're joined by DESE Commissioner Jeff Riley as well as DESE Associate Commissioner Russell Johnston. I also want to welcome Quincy School Superintendent Kevin Mulvey and Assistant Superintendent Aaron Perkins. I want to thank you all for joining us today and for all that you're doing, and especially the work that you, your faculty, your staff are doing for the students and the families in Quincy. I want to provide a quick update on COVID-19. Yesterday, the Department of Public Health reported more than 20,662 new individuals were tested by molecular tests, which doubles the number of tests completed from the day before, and 542 of those returned as positive. Massachusetts continues to be a national leader in COVID-19 testing, and yesterday we announced the extension of the state's Stop the Spread campaign through the end of October. The 7-day average for the statewide positive test rate remains at 0.8%. 361 patients are currently hospitalized and 71 of those are in the ICU. Our metrics continue to be encouraging and other states are taking notice. Yesterday, Maine removed Massachusetts residents from its list of out-of-state travelers required to quarantine or produce a negative test. And I'm really bummed that Jonathan's not here to hear me say that because he asked me about it a couple of million times. Our administration continues to update our statewide COVID-19 risk map, which shows detailed community level spread based on population and highlights which communities are considered high risk or red. As of last night, 15 communities were classified as high risk and 13 communities moved from moderate to lower risk status. The state's community enforcement and intervention team will continue to work with these higher risk communities, and it's imperative the residents of higher risk communities remain alert and responsible while we all work together to mitigate the spread in their communities. As everybody knows, last Wednesday was the first day of school for nearly 1 million public school students across Massachusetts. Getting back into the classroom was no easy task for students, families, teachers, staff, school officials and administrators, but for some districts, there remains work to be done. People have done a phenomenal job here in Massachusetts to bring our transmission rates down. And communities with the lowest risk categories on the COVID risk map, so-called gray and green, are experiencing little to no transmission of the virus. Communities and school officials should monitor 3 weeks worth of COVID-19 public health data when considering learning model plans to make decisions based on trends rather than a response based on any one recent large gathering or party, which may spike people's data for 1 week. The state's contact tracing program is equipped with the necessary tools and resources to monitor, identify, and quarantine any potential spread. And the science supports this. It's safe for these students and teachers to return to in-person learning, and our administration is clear in our expectation that students should be in the classroom if the public health data supports that. Our plan has been developed and endorsed by Massachusetts pediatricians, and we work closely with experts from our public health department as we developed it. And for most communities and districts, students and teachers are back in school in either hybrid or in-person education models, and we think we are off to a fine start. Today we had the pleasure of spending some time with educators in Quincy who've been teaching kids in person since the summer and have truly done an incredible job. They've had mostly a positive experience, and I commend them for their efforts and their ability to support their kids. Quincy Public Schools was one of the first in the state to reopen this past summer, offering in-person learning to hundreds of students with disabilities and special needs. Additionally, they stood up an optional remote learning summer school attended by more than 2,300 Quincy students across all grade levels. They're an excellent model of how to safely and responsibly get back to school using DESE's guidance. Their faculty and their staff expertly tackled the safe reopening of their schools, overcoming challenges along the way, including 2 staff COVID-19 positive cases over the summer. Quincy school officials and staff should be commended for their effective response, which ensured that in-person education was able to continue for hundreds of students with special needs. In many ways, teachers are heroes to these kids and to their families, and they play a critically important role to teach and nurture our students and they often go far beyond their job description for the sake of every child. And special education teachers and staff in particular, day in and day out, rise above what is asked of them. They dedicate their time, their lives, and hearts to the healthy growth and development of those kids, and for that, our administration is incredibly grateful. I've said before from this podium that we get lots of mail online and the old-fashioned snail mail way. But some of the most potent and powerful and poignant mail we've gotten has come from the parents of children with special needs, for whom the lack of in-person teaching had a profound impact, not just on their child's further development, but on their child's ability to sustain the success and the progress that they had made to date. And those letters and emails typically come with a significant plea for the return to in-person education. And on this one, I want to thank Quincy especially for basically never dropping the ball and finding a way to continue to offer that service throughout the course of the summer. Superintendent Mulvey, Assistant Superintendent Perkins, you and your team have done a terrific job, and I really appreciate your being here today. Before I pass the podium over to Lieutenant Governor Karen Polito, I do want to say a few words about Breonna Taylor. What happened to Breonna Taylor was a horrible, terrible tragedy. And unfortunately, in our country, too many tragedies like this befall people of color, and far too often. I think everybody appreciates the pain and the loss being felt and suffered by her family and her loved ones during this incredibly unimaginable time. Here in Massachusetts, we've worked hard over the course of the past year and a half with our colleagues in local government and law enforcement, with the Black and Latino Legislative Caucus, and with others to develop a series of initiatives and ultimately a bill that would enhance transparency and accountability in law enforcement, expand training and implementation with respect to the pursuit of those training standards, to ensure that here in the Commonwealth, we appropriately, safely, and responsibly provide service and support and protection for our citizens. And I really hope that at some point this fall, we have a chance to appropriately celebrate the signing of legislation that will hopefully deal with and solve some of these very important and significant public policy and public safety issues going forward. And with that, I want to turn it over to Lieutenant Governor Karen Polito.
Thank you, Governor. As the Governor said, we are very grateful to the many teachers, parents, administrators, and local officials across our Commonwealth that have worked so hard to get kids safely back into classrooms. I'm the mother of 2 high schoolers, and I certainly know firsthand through their experiences how important it is for them and their peers across our Commonwealth to have the best education available to them. Having lived through last spring and how challenging it was, and looking forward to a great school year ahead. It hasn't been easy for all of these students and their families. The diligence and determination of school communities in developing these careful plans throughout the Commonwealth has been integral to a successful reopening, just like the reopening of industries and their adherence to protocols and safety measures and compliance with those. It's very similar for the reopening of our schools. And as we begin this school year, so many of the classes and programs that excite our students are resuming, and this is really exciting for all of us to see. I just know from my own personal experiences with dinner conversations from my children about their subjects and their teachers and their projects and their tests. It just feels normal, certainly for them and for our family, and I hope for many families across our Commonwealth. Today, I'm pleased to announce that Massachusetts' third annual STEM Week will take place this year from October 19th through October 23rd, with the theme that we began last year of See Yourself in STEM. And we are so happy to not miss this year and at the same time underscore the importance of STEM education, and that kids in every corner of Massachusetts will have the opportunities they need to succeed in the fields of science, technology, engineering, and math. We will continue to take a careful and cautious path forward to reopening schools, and in doing so, have adapted this year's STEM Week to new school and work environments as we all combat COVID-19. We're asking teachers and employers to participate and encourage them to develop new and creative ways to host STEM Week events to highlight the opportunities that exist in STEM education. And these events will be a mix of virtual and in-person activities and lessons, speaker panels, and design challenges. This year, the STEM Advisory Council is coordinating with 7 organizations across our state to offer STEM options through different design challenges. And let me just list them. They're pretty exciting. Kids in Tech, the Museum of Science, Gale Force Education, Fit Money, Mind Research Institute, WPI STEM Education Center, and the Wade Institute for Science Education. We launched STEM Week 3 years ago, hoping to give more students, especially in underrepresented populations, girls and communities of color, more insight and exposure to all the ways science, technology, engineering, and math touch all of our lives every day, and to spark their interest early on in their education, to think about and then pursue careers in STEM. This year, we have been faced with the battle against COVID-19, and I think we all agree it's abundantly clear the role that science, engineering, technology, and math have played in this pandemic environment. We don't need to look far to understand how integral STEM is to our response. When you see nurses and doctors working hard to save lives, scientists working furiously to develop more treatments and vaccination, and advanced manufacturers that we know pivoted their workplaces to make personal protective equipment. All of those involve a STEM activity and underscore the importance of STEM education in our classrooms and in our curriculum. And the need remains, despite these challenging times, for kids to stay engaged. And Governor Baker and I and our team are committed to paving pathways to STEM careers and education for students in and outside the classroom. STEM industries are so vitally important to our Commonwealth, and without a robust and thriving workforce, Massachusetts would suffer. And we're hearing a lot from employers, smaller and larger, that we continue our efforts around workforce development and STEM education and STEM internships and access during this time, so critically important. Last year, in collaboration with schools, nonprofit organizations, colleges, museums, and our business partners, more than 1,000 events took place during STEM Week that engaged more than 10,000 students from pre-K all the way through college and all across our Commonwealth. So working together with the Executive Office of Education, the STEM Advisory Council, and our Commonwealth's 9 regional STEM networks, we're looking forward to virtually visiting classrooms and other school and business-related STEM activities to highlight successful programs and raise awareness about developments in STEM education, and that the Massachusetts STEM workforce is critically important to the success of our economic recovery and rebound in our future. For more information about these regional events, visit www.massstemweek.org, and I look forward to working with all of you to highlight these events and to spreading the word about how more school districts can engage in STEM all throughout their curriculum for all the ages that they are working with. With that, I'd like to turn it over to Commissioner Riley, but also wish to thank the Quincy Public Schools for your hard work and your leadership in helping students and their families have a great school year. Commissioner Riley.
Good afternoon, and a special thank you to the Quincy Public Schools in particular and all of our districts for what they do for our kids every day. Knowing that this virus is not going to go away for a while, we have created protocols endorsed by the medical community on how to safely return to school. Throughout this crisis, our guiding principle has been doing what is best for kids. And even though school looks different this fall with masks, physical distancing, hand hygiene, and all the other protocols that we put in place for a safe reopening, we know what is best for our students is to get back into the routine of learning. As a state, the rates of transmission in Massachusetts right now are low. And according to the medical community, that means we can, and indeed should, bring our students back for in-person instruction safely. However, we also recognize that individual communities are experiencing different levels of transmission. That's why the administration began releasing a weekly report that provides an individual COVID-19 metric for each community of red, yellow, green, or gray. We've asked districts to really focus on using this data, along with other local health factors, as the basis for whether kids will attend school full-time in person, hybrid, or remote. Districts should be using at least 3 reports or 4 weeks of data to make these decisions. We know the possibility of a second spike exists, but while we are in a situation where a district has been green or gray for many weeks, we are asking districts to bring kids back to school in person or in a hybrid model. It would be unfortunate if later in the year a district had to go remote because the virus spiked back up in their community. And they recognize, wow, we could have had our kids back in for a couple of months, or maybe even 6 months, and we missed that window. Last week, the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education asked school districts to inform the department if they learn that a student or staff member has tested positive for COVID-19. While DESE will not play a formal role in tracking or monitoring cases at a local or statewide level, this information will allow the department to provide support to local officials and districts in consultation with public health authorities and to monitor statewide trends. Our goal is to help superintendents and school administrators navigate what to do when they experience positive cases of students or staff in accordance with the COVID-19 protocols we released in our guidance over the summer. We have much work ahead this year to support our students during this extraordinarily challenging school year, but with schools back open this month, we have taken the critical first step. And I want to thank the thousands of teachers, school administrators, support staff, and families across the Commonwealth who are making that possible. And with that said, it is my honor to turn the podium over to the Quincy Public Schools. We have Superintendent Mulvey and Assistant Superintendent Perkins here to discuss their programming that they did over the summer and into the fall. Welcome.
Thank you, Commissioner. Good afternoon, Governor Baker, Lieutenant Governor Polito, Commissioner Riley, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Kevin Mulvey, Superintendent of the Schools for the Quincy Public Schools, and it is my honor to be here today with Assistant Superintendent Erin Perkins to speak to you about Quincy's school reopening plans. I must first begin by thanking Mayor Thomas Koch and the Quincy School Committee for their continuous support in planning and implementation of Quincy's reopening plan. I would also like to thank the entire staff of the Quincy Public Schools and the entire school community for their dedication to our students and families during this COVID-19 crisis. Throughout the planning process, our students and their well-being have been the primary focus of every decision we've made. Without the support of all these stakeholders, all of our efforts would be in vain, and I am, for one, exceedingly grateful for their support. I would also like to thank in particular Commissioner Riley and Associate Commissioner Russell Johnson for their support in the planning and implementation of our summer and fall programming. Their support has been instrumental. As the Governor mentioned, Quincy was one of the first districts to have an in-person summer instruction program for our most vulnerable and highest need students. Our dedicated staff were committed to providing these crucial services to our students, and as a result, this program was a great success despite the challenges of COVID-19. This summer in-person educational program was the foundation upon which we planned and built our reopening plans for September. We continue to work with our families and staff every day to provide the highest quality educational opportunities for our students and to provide for their social and emotional well-being, and that's critical. This work has prepared us for the inevitable COVID-19 positive case of a staff member and a student. And in fact, we did have a positive case, and thanks to the guidance provided by the state and by Quincy Health Commissioner Ruth Jones, we were able to keep staff and students safe and continue with the much-needed educational programming in Quincy. We also launched a virtual summer program with live instruction to address any skill regression that occurred in the spring. This program was available for any student in the district, and as a result, we were able to reach over 2,300 students. The measure of our success is always the feedback of our students and families, and the response of all of our programs has overwhelmingly been positive. This success inspired the district to form a reentry task force comprised of parents, teachers, and members of the administration to begin developing plans for return to school in September. The task force worked tirelessly over the summer to develop a plan that focused first on student and staff safety and then on the educational opportunities that we could provide our students. Over 70 virtual focus groups were held, allowing us to reach thousands of parents, students, and staff to make sure all stakeholders had a voice in the planning. The mayor, the school committee, and the entire school community came together to support the efforts of safely returning our students to school. On September 16th, we brought back all students from pre-kindergarten to grade 3 and all high-needs students. The first phase invited back half of our 10,000 students. We are now focused on preparing to bring back the rest of our student population in grades 4 through 12, which will start on October 13th. We anticipate this phase will also be successful with the same support of our city stakeholders. Our goal in reopening schools is to bring as many students back to in-person learning as possible. I think we can all agree that there is no substitute for in-person learning. If we have the capacity to bring students back safely, we owe it to our students to do so. Again, it was an honor to be able to review Quincy's successful school reentry plan with you today, and like everyone, I hope that we can return to normalcy as quickly as possible. Thank you very much, and at this time I'd welcome Assistant Superintendent Erin Perkins to the podium. Thank you.
It's my pleasure to be here today to speak about the amazing work our staff and students did over the summer. On the first day of in-person summer program, I watched as the child I brought into the building for the first time in months ran into the arms of his awaiting teacher. This was challenging work that we asked our staff, students, and families to engage in, but the way the children lit up as they entered the room made the hard work worth the effort. The opportunity for a consistent routine focused on the individual needs of our students helped our students flourish. The ability to socialize and communicate is a crucial part of our development and one that does not always come easily to some of our students. Hearing the voices of our children and their laughter fill the school building again was one of the greatest rewards. In speaking with a parent about why the in-person summer program was so important for her son, she summed it up perfectly. For my child with autism, that face-to-face time cannot be replaced. Those connections that are so crucial to his education, things like eye contact and understanding social cues, just cannot be taught over the computer. I am extremely proud of the work we were able to do over the summer, and I know how important it was to our students and families. I want to thank our unbelievably dedicated staff who made this possible, and the families who put their faith and trust in us this summer.
Let's start with questions for the folks to my left here.
Superintendent Mulvey, one question?
Yeah.
Hi, Superintendent. I'll start with
Good afternoon.
Shout out to Point Webster.
Of course. God's country.
Can you explain, I know that the high school went back a little bit earlier than you would have planned. Can you explain how you did that? was there any pressure from the state to try to get back? I mean, the governor and the staff have been really pushing, letting the districts make the decisions. But now it seems like, if it's safe to do so, we really want to get these kids back. Can you explain that?
Sure, certainly. Initially, when we proposed our plan, and the reentry task force that I had mentioned in my remarks essentially put together options for the school committee with regard to reentry. Our initial option was to have three phases. Phase 1 on September 16th, Phase 2 on October 13th, and then Phase 3 on November 16th. It was really the feedback from the community, as well as input, obviously, from the school committee that inspired the school committee to actually want to increase, or I should say speed up the reentry for middle school and high school. It was also the fact that Quincy has been consistently, at least over the past month, solidly in the green in the Massachusetts COVID-19 metrics. And that, as well as our advice from our Commissioner Ruth Jones, Health Commissioner Ruth Jones, we made, and the school committee made the decision to actually speed up the phase-in for middle school and high school, and that was the basis for that decision.
Was there any pressure, though, from the state?
Absolutely not, no. The decision was really community-based and based on interaction between, obviously, myself, the superintendent's leadership team, and the school committee, as well as the community.
Question for Commissioner Riley. I know that you've requested a written response from these 16 school districts to outline their plan for in-person learning. What is the course of action if they decide not to do in-person, even though the metrics say they safely can do so?
So we want districts to have the time it takes, the school boards to have the time it takes to respond. So we've given them a 10-day window, and we're going to assess what that says. I mean, it could lead to up to everything, including an audit of the entire school district. We want to see what the plan is. I think districts asked repeatedly after what happened in March, is there a metric that we can gauge how we're doing by, so we can make good decisions on whether we should open up schools or not. And the medical community spent a lot of time developing this metric, and we're just asking people to try to follow the metric as best as they can.
And if they decide not to, will the state force their hand?
I think we're going to see what happens. We're going to wait for the written responses and see what next steps are going to be from there.
And what does an audit exactly mean? What does that mean for a district if we decide?
So it's two things, right? It's a focus on what's happening remotely and what that looks like, what the instruction looks like, instructional hours, things like that. But it also looks at the entirety of the district, from our special education students being served, second language learners, what's the quality of the curriculum. It's kind of a soup to nuts audit is what that is.
And then could you try to force their hand depending on what that audit shows you?
I think we're gonna assess where we are. We're gonna let these people have time to send us some documentation, and we're going to make decisions then.
Commissioner Riley, are there any other school districts aside from those 16 that you plan to reach out to? And then, in addition, I know, in the district that I live in, that in-person learning has largely been postponed because they can't find the staff that they need to come into the building to do it. And what can the state help those districts? You don't have people willing to come into the building.
So districts make decisions on who's eligible for leave on a district-by-district basis because they all have their own individual contracts, but we're always here to support school superintendents and school committees if we can, to help them think through what next steps could be to try to bring kids back to school.
And are there any other communities other than those 16 that got those letters?
So I think the metric is a living metric. I think we're going to be in this situation all year long, so it would not surprise me if we were to look during the year about where people are to make sure people are lined up. This goes both ways too, right? I mean, if you're a red district for 3 weeks or more, our recommendation is that you go remote. We're asking people to really follow what the doctors built for us.
And then a question to Governor Baker on this subject. I've been seeing, on social media and expressions of frustration from parents who would like their kids to go back to in-person learning over your decision to loosen restrictions on dining. How do you square those two, saying it's really important for kids to go back to school, but also say that in these non-school activities?
We think it's really important for kids to go back to school, which is why we have the folks from Quincy here today to talk about what they're up to and why the commissioner sent the letter out to communities that have been green or gray since the beginning of August, I think. And it's why we developed the guidance that was town by town, so that districts would be able to look at their own data week over week over week and then make decisions based on that guidance, which we developed in conjunction with our colleagues from the Department of Public Health and some of the folks in the medical community here. I don't view the decisions we make around this stuff to be in competition with one another. Part of the reason we made the change with respect to restaurants was because we talk all the time to the governors around the rest of the Northeast, and they made pretty clear to us that their current operating model, which was a little more open than ours, had not proven to be a significant threat to the public health. So we adopted it. And if we continue to see circumstances or situations where employers in other places are working with a different set of guidance than the ones we have here, and it turns out that it doesn't, based on the tracing work and the work that's being done by folks in those communities, then we'll talk about adopting it here as well. But I don't see those as in competition with each other. I don't see them as in conflict with each other. We think kids should be in school, and we think communities should be following the rules and the guidance that was developed by the department and using the district by district data that's now been available to people since the beginning of August.
Governor, Brigham and Women's maybe an hour and a half ago announced that they have a cluster of cases on 2 units, 5 patients, 5 staff. There's worry people will be afraid to go into hospitals. Can you comment on that?
So if you think about how many times our team has stood at this podium and talked about how many people in Massachusetts hospitals have COVID. I mean, we're talking tens of thousands, maybe it's probably hundreds of thousands of people across the healthcare system and the hospital community here in Massachusetts. And yet, despite that, the number of outbreaks that we've seen in Massachusetts hospitals over that period of time has been pretty small, which is a big statement about the work that's been done by our hospital community and our healthcare community generally to do a really good job on the infection control element associated with keeping staff safe as well as keeping patients safe. I think what I say today, there are 350 plus or minus 370 people who have COVID who are in hospitals in Massachusetts. They notified the Department of Public Health as soon as the issue associated with the outbreak became available, just like the folks in Bay State did about 2 months ago. And we expect to work with them and with their infectious disease specialists to chase down any additional cases that may have occurred as a result of that particular outbreak, and then we'll do everything we can to support them on isolation and quarantine to make sure that that the outbreak is contained.
Has the state been dispersing any additional money to school districts, either through the CARES program or just from the state, to help with HVAC, plexiglass, all the stuff that schools need to make this happen?
So I think back in July, was it in July? We sent about $710 million to local communities to spend on COVID-related stuff and $400 million to school districts directly, and made the decision to fund Chapter 70 at last year's rate plus inflation. So the total number that went to the schools was about an increase of roughly $500 million over last year, and the amount that went to the communities was local aid plus the $710 million that went to cities and towns.
When schools were creating the reopening plans,
Say again?
when schools were making their reopening plans, you had said that you favored local control for that.
Yep.
Now schools, Watertown educators today put out a statement saying they feel like they're being bullied to go back to in-person. Why mix mixed messages there?
I don't think the messages are mixed. We said we were going to provide them with a ton of data and guidance, with Commissioner Riley and the American Academy of Pediatrics and the Mass Department of Public Health worked very hard on developing over the course of the summer. We sent $710 million to cities and towns and $400 million to school districts to help them make whatever investments they thought they needed to make to prepare for reopening. He's had calls, I don't know, every other day maybe, with school superintendents over the course of the past 3 or 4 months to deal with whatever particular issues might get raised by a particular school district, like the one that you mentioned, you should tell him which one it is, and I'm sure he'll be happy to talk to them about it and see what they can do about it. But our view on this was creating that district map was our way of saying there is guidance that's not just being used here in Massachusetts, but is being used in other states and in other countries about what's considered to be, low risk, moderate risk, and high risk. And we felt that was the final element that we needed to make available to school districts so that they would know where they stood. And I think the question the commissioner is asking here, which is if you are a low-risk district, and you've been a low-risk district now for 8 weeks, and you have no plans to return to in-person learning, when most people in the education and the public health and the pediatric community all believe that in-person learning, especially for young kids, is a critical part of their educational and social development, we want to know what your plan is to get back. I don't think that's bullying. I think it's a perfectly appropriate question to ask on behalf of the people of those communities and especially the kids.
Last question, Governor Baker. Yesterday, President Trump said that was asked whether he would support a peaceful transfer of power should he lose whatever the result of the election would be, and he would not commit to that. He said we're going to have to see what happens, and then suggested there won't be a transfer because he's just going to continue, and then the ballots are out of control. What is your reaction to that? Those statements from the President of the United States, and then what can you, as Governor of Massachusetts, do to help ensure there is a peaceful transfer of power, even if the President himself won't be doing that?
Well, the second part of that question is a little harder to answer than the first part. So let's start with the first part. I voted mail-in the primary. It was what I would describe here in Massachusetts pretty similar to the way mail-in ballots work in most states, which is it's basically absentee balloting on steroids. And part of the reason we put that program in place in Massachusetts was because we weren't really sure where COVID was going to be for the primary or the general election, and we wanted to make sure people who were concerned about going to polling places would have an option. And it worked just fine. The same way it worked just fine across the rest of the country. Now, we've been through some really difficult periods of time and points of transition in our nation's history. Let's pick, how about Abraham Lincoln, who got 39% of the popular vote and 52% of the electoral vote. But that electoral college had to actually show up and vote based on the vote that took place in their states for him to be elected president, because he got the majority of the electoral vote and a plurality of the popular vote. He got more popular votes than anybody else, but he didn't get to 51. And there was tremendous concern because of the fact that our country at that point in time was basically unraveling, that the Electoral College wouldn't stand up and do what they were supposed to do and vote on behalf of the people who had actually won the presidential election in their state. And they did. Immediately, on the day that they were asked to do it. A huge part of this nation's glory, to the extent it exists as a beacon to others, is the peaceful transfer of power based on the vote of the people of this country. Mail-in balloting has been with us forever. And that peaceful transfer of power is what the people of this country rely on when they go to vote. It is appalling and outrageous that anyone would suggest for a minute that if they lose an election, they're not going to leave. Period. And I know that I am sure, for the vast majority of the elected officials in the United States of America when I say that. And that's where I think a big piece of the voice, whatever happens on Election Day, will come from. How many times at the end of an election have we heard of the words, "The people have spoken"? Now, we all spent that primary being very excited about the size of the turnout we had here in Massachusetts. Record-setting turnout in our primary. That's a good thing. And I said at the time when I got asked about it, people think there's a lot at stake in this election. And there is. Whichever state you're from, region you're from, or where you're voting up and down the ticket. So one way or another, the people are going to speak in November, up and down the ticket for all those races that are out there. And those of us who serve in public life will do everything we can to make sure that the people's will is followed through and executed on. Because that is fundamentally why there's a United States of America in the first place.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Governor.